Appreciate that very, very much. It is a blessing when people such as you choose to grace our assembly. So you are welcome today and any other time and opportunity that you would like. Just like to let the congregation know, sometimes we don't hear, we wonder what kind of influence we're having on the community in which we live. Are we having any impact? Are we having it? I got a text out of the blue. I'm assuming this particular person found my phone number, my cell number through the website. I don't know. And they said, this was Thursday evening, I just drove by your building. Your sign was great. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it nice to know that people are aware of what we're doing to try to reach out to the community? So I don't know who that person was, but I'm glad they did, and I hope maybe sometime I'll get to meet them. Today's lesson is a continuation of one we started last week. We're talking about the need to be humble people. Now, we know that we are to be humble, right? Philippians chapter 2 talks about, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. And when he goes on to talk about Jesus, he talks about how Jesus emptied himself, how he lowered himself. Now, who was Jesus? Well, Jesus was the Son of God. He had all power. He could do miracles. He could do wonders. He was a creator. He could do whatever he wanted, right? He could be as rich as he wanted or as poor as he wanted. And yet it says in Philippians chapter 2 that Christ emptied himself, poured himself out, and rather than being king of the world, he chose to be humble like a man. Now, if you're a woman in the audience, it's the same concept. Humble as a human being. And we know all the troubles, all the trials, all the difficulties it is to be human, right? If you have the choice, you want to be God or you want to be human? I think I choose God. Not necessarily I have to be in control, but then I don't have this flesh that tempts me. I don't have all the weaknesses that I have in my life. I don't have all the struggles. I wouldn't get sick. You think of all the things that we have that are connected with this physical body that our spirit dwells in. And so Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, this one who emptied himself, come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And in that same concept, he says, come learn of me. So that's what we're doing today. We started last week. Let's learn about Jesus. And let's learn about Jesus, especially the concept of humility. We talk about humility a lot. We realize that we need to be humble people. But how do I know if I'm humble or not? How can I test myself to find out if really I'm the humble person that God wants me to be? And that's what we talked about last week, and we're going to build on it again this week, is the idea that there's things that will demonstrate, there's things that will show yourself as well as show others that you are a humble person. So that's why I call this practicing humility. A lot of us know what humility means. We could look it up. And we know I'm supposed to be humble, right? But are you humble? It's interesting. You can know what something means, but it doesn't mean because you know it. Knowledge doesn't, in and of itself, doesn't mean you do it. You've got to have a heart that will embrace the word. You have to have a heart that will embrace the definition and start making application in your life. So last week, we talked about that. We talked about, in order for this to be the case, we need to surrender ourselves completely. Humble means to cease to resist. It means to yield the power or control to someone else. It's to give in and to give oneself up. And there's supposed to be one more. There it is. So that's what we talked about last week, giving yourself up. And there's many passages that talk about that. Jesus says, if anyone wants to follow me, what must he do? He must deny self. See, that's what this is. Surrender yourself, and we're not surrendering it to someone else. We're surrendering it to Jesus, right? Because Jesus isn't going to stab you in the back. Jesus isn't going to lie about you. Jesus isn't going to be ugly with you, That's what humans do to each other. And that's why we struggle humbling to someone else. Submitting to a human being because you never know what's going to happen. But yet with Jesus, he's the same today as he was yesterday and as he'll always be. So if I'm going to yield myself or surrender myself to someone, I want to surrender myself to someone that's going to be stable, and I always know what to expect, and there'll be no surprises. And that's the way it is with Jesus. And the reason we can know that is because in this book, which we call the Bible, and especially the New Testament, Jesus tells us what he expects. And there we go. He's not, when you show up in the judgment day, say, well, I wrote that in there, but that doesn't, I don't believe that anymore. Jesus is going to be the same, folks. So if you listen to what he says and you do what he says, you can rest assured surrendering yourself to him is going to benefit you. So we talked about this, and we looked at all these passages that talk about surrendering, right? You need to submit yourself to the Lord. You got to humble yourself before the Lord. Paul wrote in Galatians 2, he says, I no longer live, right? Because he emptied himself. That's what Jesus did. Jesus emptied himself, right? And became a man, became a servant. Paul says, well, I'm going to empty myself, but I'm going to empty myself, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to fill myself with something, right? I'm going to fill myself with Jesus Christ. That's Galatians 2:20. And we all know that passage, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Guess what? You will never do that if you never learn true humility. And that's where a lot of believers mess up. Doctrinally, they're convinced I need to repent. Doctrinally, they're convinced they got to confess. Doctrinally, they're convinced they must be baptized for the remission of sin, and they never learn humility. And guess what? They never serve the Lord as they should because they never learned the definition. Maybe they got, but they never practiced it. We must be people who practice. And we've got this idea is when you surrender to Jesus, I like to throw a little positiveness in here. So I'm going to we all have, remember this flesh I talked about with all its problems? Is there anything today that's on your mind? Are you worrying about something? Are you concerned about something? Well, if you're anything like me, oh man, you don't want him in my brain. I worry about myself. I worry about my family. I worry about all of you. I worry about people I don't know. I worry about the people that may be going to hell. I mean, I got so many worries and anxiety. I'm a healthy man. So soon to be 66. But I still worry, No, I'm not diagnosed with cancer. I'm not diagnosed with whatever. I'm healthy, but you still worry, right? You still think, well, when's it going to hit me? Why should I be so lucky to avoid all these horrible things that everybody else does? So that's how my mind's working, this racing, 150 miles an hour all the time. And Jesus says, okay, Daryl, you need to cast all your anxieties on me. Cast all your worries on me. Why, Jesus, would I do such a thing? He says, because I'm the one who truly cares about you. Do we believe it, though? And you'll only do this, again, if you're humble. So we talked about last week, okay, well, what's going to keep me from being humble? Yeah, I want to be humble, Well, right there, you can tell by the expression, if that's your expression, you're probably never going to be a humble person because you're kind of set in your ways, and I think that's him and her, I guess, husband and wife. Oh, we're happily married, and let me tell you, it's been 60 years. That's real convincing, isn't it? Can't you usually tell by somebody's face? What usually hinders us from humbling? And it's that word self. It's that selfishness. It's the pride that keeps us from doing it. So what does it mean to be proud? This is a little bit of review for you that weren't here last week. Well, let me tell you, there's a few statements here, and you don't have to answer out loud, and you don't have to raise your hand if you're guilty of it, but just think about it, okay? If you're self-focused, are you self-focused? I know I'm self-focused. I didn't come today like I looked when I got up. Because I looked at self in the mirror and I said, there's no way they're going to look at me and listen to me if I go to service looking the way I am. So I try to, present myself. Why do we do that? That's self-focused. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the Bible talks about that. We think we are so great. And the Bible in Romans chapter 12 talks about being self-focused. And thinking you're great, thinking you're better than other people. We're always comparing ourselves. The next thing is we compare ourselves with others. I'm better. And that Matthew 7, that's the idea that, I can see that little speck in Angie's eye. And Angie says, well, Terrell, have you noticed the great big beam coming out of your own eye? Oh, no. Me? A beam out of my eye? You got to be kidding. Well, there you go, see? Comparing, isn't it interesting how we always want to compare ourselves with somebody lower than we are? And the Bible tells us, who do we compare ourselves to? We should be comparing ourselves to Jesus Christ because he is the full stature, right? Ephesians chapter 4. That's who you need to, and if I tell you, if you compare yourself to Christ all the time, you're going to be on your knees all the time. You're going to be a humble person. So compare yourself with other people, that's pride showing itself. Or we think, well, that's the exception. You know, well, I'm different. I know Jesus said this, but you know, my situation's different, or I'm different, and so therefore this doesn't really apply to me. There you go, pride coming in there. And we got all those passages that talk about the danger of pride. So we've been talking about practicing humility. So for last week, these were the points, okay? And we're going to look at 5 more today. The first one is pray for someone. For you to pray for someone else means you have to take your attention away from who? From yourself. Oh, my aches. Oh, my pains. Oh, Lord, please, my family. And Lord, this about me and me. Well, what about somebody else? Start praying about other people, not just about yourself. Start praying about other families, not just your family. Think about somebody else. That pulls the attention away from self, because thinking of self all the time is the opposite of being humble. So we talked about that last week in the passages that talk about that. And we have many examples where people were praying all the time for somebody else besides themselves. Another one we looked at last week is consider the other side. You know, we think we're so right. Oh, I know what that passage means. And you open your mouth and say, well, have you considered? No, I'm not going to consider that because I know my interpretation is the right one. So we're very, I don't know what you want to call it, convinced that we always are the wisest, smartest, and I know the Bible better than you do. How can you know what it says? You've only been baptized for 2 months. I've been baptized for 40 years. You know, the arrogance again. Well, let's consider the other side before we come across as that haughty, arrogant person. Another thing is do a good deed, but don't let anybody know about it. Right? And there's that passage where you don't let the left hand know what the right hand's doing, and don't let the right hand know what the left hand's doing. Why did Jesus put that in there? Jesus put that in there because he knows that's what we do. Well, do you know what I did yesterday? I spent 6 hours doing blah, 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 blah for somebody. Mm-hmm. Won't you pat me? I've already patted myself on the back. Why don't you pat me on the back as well? I mean, totally self-absorbed. No, do something for somebody, but don't tell anybody about it. Just do it because you care. Because who did that? That's exactly what Jesus did all the time. He was constantly doing something for somebody else. I mean, he didn't have a house to live. He wasn't married. He didn't have children. He didn't even have a pillow to lay his head on. But boy, he was focused on doing something for somebody else all the time. That's what it means to be humble. Refuse to complain. We are the greatest complainers in the United States. That is at the top of the list. We complain about the economy. We complain about politics. We complain about our spouse. We complain about our kids. We complain about the church. You know, it just goes on and on and on. We're constantly complaining. And guess what God says? God says, don't complain. In fact, he even goes on, I think it's 1 Peter 4, he says, don't complain because God says you got to be nice now. Terrell, you got to be nice. You got to be hospitable. That's the only reason I invite all you to my house today for lunch. Is because I know that passage is in there. And when you leave, I'm going to gripe about it. You know what I had to do to get ready for all of you guys? No, those are visiting. That's not the truth. Those who don't know me, you can walk away and say, that's a weird preacher, isn't he? Anyway, God says, don't show hospitality without grudging, without complaining. We're constantly complaining. Well, their marriage is better than our marriage. She's prettier than you are. He's a lot more hunky than you are. We're always comparing and complaining. And God says, quit complaining, right? This is what people who aren't humble do. So if you find yourself in these, that means I got to work a little bit on my humility, right? Be nice to somebody that doesn't deserve it. You know how hard that is? That's easy to say. Oh, yes, we Christians, we need to go do something for people in the world that don't deserve it. And we leave it there. How many times do you do that? What do you use to define a person that doesn't deserve it? Well, they're mean to me. Why should I be nice to them? You know, they don't, whatever. She doesn't pick up after me. Why should I help her? He doesn't do that. Why should I, refuse to do it because they don't deserve it. They don't deserve my kindness. They don't deserve my forgiveness. They don't deserve my grace. And they definitely don't deserve my money. That's how we think. Be nice to someone who doesn't deserve it. And who taught us that lesson stronger than anybody else in the world? It's Jesus Christ. Did he get what he deserved? No, he didn't get what he deserved. And he did everything he could to people who didn't deserve it, because none of us deserve it, do we? I don't deserve salvation, and neither do you. None of us are good enough for salvation. But thanks to what Jesus has done and the grace and the mercy of the Father and the Son and the Spirit, I have access to the throne. I have access to forgiveness, but I don't deserve it. These are things that we looked at last week. So, let's get moving. 5 new things, and the lesson will be yours. So the new one for us today is question your anger. So you may say, well, what's that got to do with humility? Anger? I thought you were talking about humility, Terrell. Well, let's see. Anger, what is anger anyway? Come on. There it is. Anger is a sensation that tells you that something's not right. Do you ever get angry? Or is everything perfect in your life? Something's not right now. I don't know about you, but every day in my life there's something that's not right. And maybe it's me. Who knows? Maybe that's why things aren't right. It's my own choices. It's my own guilt. But anyway, anger is the sensation that just builds up on you that says, Terrell, this isn't right. I'm upset about this because I don't like it. And the problem is not that everything is supposed to be happy. Everything's supposed to be great. We think that our anger is justified, don't we? Well, I have a right to be angry because of, and you say what it is. You did this, or I did that, or somebody did something, or things didn't turn out the way that I wanted them to, so we get angry about it, right? Well, I wanted the pink lollipop, and I got the green one, right? Well, be grateful you're giving me a lollipop. Why do you get upset about what color it is? I mean, that's a silly example, but that's what we do sometimes. Anger just is this temptation that we feel like I've been overlooked, or I didn't get what I deserved, or I don't like the end result of this. And what story could we go to in the Old Testament that is an example of someone who believes God, follows God, is a child of God, and got angry about something that they're not justified for? But he thought he was. Jonah was sent to the city of Nineveh, and Nineveh was filled with wicked people. In fact, it was so wicked, God says, I'm going to destroy them all. They weren't Jews. They were Gentiles. And the Jews knew that Gentiles were heathens, right? And the Jews would assume they had to get rid of them. We don't like those heathens. They're just a problem. They're just a pain in my life, And they make me angry. They steal my crops, They look kind of not so nice at my daughters in a bad way. Those Gentiles are always around us, but we don't want them. That's kind of what they are. And so we feel I have the right to be mad at those people. We want the right to let's get rid of those people. Guess what? Jonah, God says, okay, I got a lesson to teach Jonah. Have you ever thought about the pain that you experience and the struggles that you're experiencing actually are God sent? Because he's got something for you to learn. He's got something for me to learn. So Jonah, and the story of Jonah, but reluctantly, what does he finally do? He finally goes, right? And does he do what God says? Yes, he does. He doesn't say he was complaining, but when you read the story, it's all in between the lines, He did not want to do, but he knew he had to do it. Sounds like doing something nice and grudgingly or complaining. We learned about that a little while ago. Well, anyway, you remember the story. He marched all the way through the city, preached from one end to the other end, and we say, lo and behold, isn't that an expression sometimes they use in the South? Lo and behold, the entire city repented. Now, what should Jonah done? I mean, he's done God asked him to do what I would say almost an impossible thing. One man to convert an entire city through his works, okay? I think God was with it, but, God's with him. One man, I mean, if I had done that, boy, I would be floating on cloud 9, as they say. Maybe in cloud 12, maybe a little bit higher up, I would feel so good, but Jonah was mad. He didn't like it that all those people repented. And you remember the story, he went and complained, he went over in the corner and sulked, He was angry. And guess what? God asked Jonah just right out, is it right for you to be angry? Do you have the right to be angry, Jonah? He thought he did, didn't he? In his own thought process there. Oh, that's self again, isn't it? And we do this so many times, folks. New Testament Christians today, we do this. We think we have the right to be mad about something because it didn't go the right way or something we didn't like about it. And if we don't like when good happens to undeserving people, we've got a problem, brethren. We really do. And God just calls Jonah out and says, is it right for you to be angry? And I think you know the answer to that. It wasn't. He did not have the right to be angry. In fact, he should have been rejoicing, right? Anger is not sin, we might say, right? However, strong anger leads to sin. Anger is an emotion, right? Questioning our anger helps us gain a distance from the feelings and the emotion. Remember, anger is a sensation. It's an emotion. Something happens, woof, it rushes, doesn't it? And it's there. And it's intense. You saw that picture. He's angry. He can't wait, right? So you're intense. Well, is it wrong to be intense? Is it wrong to be evoked emotionally? No, that's why God gave us emotions. But God expects us to control the emotion, and that's where we normally cross the line. So what do? I want to be humble. Anger is going to lead me if I hold on to it, if I nurture it, and I feed it. Guess what? It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to eventually explode. You're eventually going to do something that is outright sinful. So I need to question. When you start feeling that, question your anger. And questioning it makes you stop and think, well, should I? And then it causes you to kind of back up a little bit, right? Let me rethink my emotions. Do I really want to do this? Do I really have the right to feel this way? Am I being fair in my thought process? Right? And usually the anger that's the strongest is when we make the assumption that we're right, and therefore my actions are justified. I know that a congregation, not too long ago, they started having lots of people from the community visit. Okay? And for those who kind of know the difference in the history of the Church of Christ in our country, you know that we were all united one day, and then boom. We quit getting along with those people over there in the Church of Christ. And we're going to get along. We get along with these people over here because these all think like we do and those don't on certain issues. There's a lot of things we think alike on. And so we had this thing, I witnessed anger galore in my younger years between people who would say they loved each other. What was it? Well, the one side felt justified and the other side felt justified. They were convinced, both sides were convinced that they were correct. And so therefore their anger and their ugly words and their division was justified, we say. I'm not so sure. What does the Bible tell us to do? The Bible tells us we need to be slow to wrath. Contain that. It's like the pressure cooker, right? When you feel that pressure going up, take off that lid. Let some of that steam out. Because otherwise it's going to explode and something bad is going to happen. And probably something that is not conducive or constructive to the relationship either. Let us be slow to wrath. He said, and the one that's slow to wrath is what? He's really smart. And isn't it interesting? Sometimes the one who thinks they're the smartest, the one who gets angry is the quickest. But he says, no. He who is slow to wrath has great understanding. We look at the situation. We take a step back and we look at the situation. But he who is impulsive, what can he expect? He's going to expect a life of folly. It's just going to be a mess if you're impulsive. And that's something I struggle a bit with because I'm pretty impulsive sometimes. Another passage the wise man has to say to us in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty ones. And he who rules or controls his spirit than he who takes the city. Smart words, isn't it? God gave this guy some really good thought passages, didn't he? Proverbs chapter 19, verse 11. The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger. Oh, he's got discretion. The guy who pops off, who's gossiping and talking about other people and slandering other people and saying bad things about other people, guess what he is? He doesn't show much discretion, does he? He's laying it all out there and smearing on everybody. Or it could be a she for that matter, okay? The discretion, the person that has discretion, it's going to be slow. But see, when you get angry, that much you want you to spread the stuff even more. You want to discredit the other person, defame the other person even more. And it says, and his glory is, what does the glory of the person who shows discretion do? He overlooks the transgression. Now, where do we learn that from? We're right back to Jesus Christ. How many times has he overlooked your transgression? I'll tell you, it's probably been about 150,000 times in my life that he's overlooked my transgression. Galatians chapter 5, 9 through 12, we talk about the works of the flesh, and in that list, let's jump to the New Testament. Hatred is in there. And outbursts of anger is in there. And we Christians think we're going to make it to heaven with our anger and with our outbursts because we don't use the instrument in our worship. It's like we substitute what we think is real important and makes us the true church, and then we could care less about these other things. What about the works of the flesh? We can all be guilty of the works of the flesh as long as we're worshiping correctly. That's the impression I sometimes get from places I've been. And then you go on in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 23 through 25, he says, you need to renew your spirit. Change the way you think. Renew the spirit of your mind. Let this mind be in you, Philippians 2 says. Very similar. And the reason we want to renew the spirit of our mind is because if we don't do that and put on the new man, if we don't do that, we will grieve the Spirit. And I'll tell you, that's something you do not want to do. You will not make it to heaven if you grieve the Spirit. Because he is your earnest. He is your seal in the day of redemption. And he goes on to say the reason you do that is because we're members of each other. So no, I'm not going to talk about you, and I'm not going to slander you, and I'm not get angry at you. Well, I might get angry, but I can control it, right? I'm not going to let that anger cause me to do or say something in a way that is not good. And that's exactly what he says a little bit further down in that chapter. He says, be angry, right? So that's why I say anger must not be a sin. Because he says, be angry and do not sin. Right? So what's the difference? Angry is the sensation. Angry is the emotion. He says, but you control it. And you dissipate it. And you remove it. Because anger will lead you to sin. And you know what some people do? They feed it. They feed it. And they feed it. How do they do it? Because they rethink it. Whatever it was that made them mad, whatever made them angry, you're going to hold on to it. You're not going to let it go. And it will destroy you. Because he goes on to say, if you don't let go of it, you're giving place to the devil. And I'll tell you, if the devil gets in you, you can know the whole Bible frontwards and backwards. You can quote scripture like crazy. You can go to all of the services and get up here and preach, for that matter, or lead a song. But behind the scenes, you're being controlled by the devil. The word is called hypocrisy. The next one. Next point, let it go. We got to be people. If we are humble people, we can let things go. Humble people can let things go. Prideful, arrogant people will never let it go. And you might say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, unfortunately, many today are easily upset. You'd think, as rich of a society that we live in, and as much things that we have available to us, that we wouldn't get upset very bad. I mean, there's people that barely have food to eat. There's people that don't even have places to live. There's people who don't even have running water. And we get upset by these little things. Well, you didn't speak to me this morning, right? He offended me because he didn't agree with me in my Bible class, kind of thing. We're so touchy. And the result is that we're easily upset and easily offended. We become outraged, right? What does God say? God says, you know what, Terrell, you just need to let it go. Well, where's the examples of that in the Bible? Well, you go back to Joseph. What happened to Joseph? Did he get something he didn't deserve? Absolutely. He couldn't help it that he was one of the favorite boys. Parents make choices, And Joseph got the coat and the other boys didn't. It's fair. Maybe it's the parents' fault. But Joseph wasn't the guilty one, folks, here. Right? But his brothers despised him. They couldn't stand him, and they wouldn't let it go. So what happened? They threw him in the pit, right? Hoped he would die, and then these other guys come by and say, oh, we can make some money off of him. And they sell him into slavery. The brothers couldn't let it go. So let's get rid of him. You know how many people get run out of the local congregation because you can't let something go? The Canaanite woman with the sick daughter, remember her in Matthew chapter 15? She comes to Jesus and says, please, 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 would you heal my daughter? And he says, no, I'm sorry, you're a Canaanite. Right? Jews and Gentiles, Jews and Canaanites don't mix. And that was the law. But she was persistent. She kept on begging because she understood who Jesus was and what Jesus could do for her and her daughter. So she kept on just begging, please. She said, even there's crumbs that fall from the rich man's table and feeds the dogs. Can't you do something for me? She was persistent, right? And you see what her persistence did? Jesus healed the daughter. You may say, well, what's this particular figure? Well, if that was you or me, we wouldn't let it go. Oh, no, no. The law says Jews have nothing to do with those. I'm sorry, that's keeping the law. I don't have to come to your house, and I'm not coming to your house. I'm not going to divide my house and do something nice for you. There could be some people in this story that wouldn't let it go, but guess what? Jesus let it go. He quoted and he said, well, I have to first go to, so he's using scripture, Jesus was. Don't you know? I am here for the Jews. I'm here for the chosen people, and you're not the chosen people. And Jesus could have held on to that, but guess what? He did not. He let it go, and he did something nice for someone that didn't deserve it. We need to follow that example, folks. Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark. You remember that story? Paul and Barnabas were good travel people. They got along well. They were doing all kinds of things for the mission field. And Barnabas wanted to bring along his cousin, John Mark, and so he was for a while, but then John Mark, towards the end of the trip, says, I need to get back home. We don't know why he left, but he left. That ticked Paul off. That's my words. That's not the Bible. But Paul didn't like it, and he wouldn't let it go. He held that for a number of years. But guess what? Paul was focusing on being like Jesus, and sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes time to let things go. But Paul let it go. And in one of the letters there in Colossians chapter 4, he says, you know what? Bring John Mark with you because I view him as beneficial to the work. Total different spirit, total different thoughts, isn't it? He let it go. And we'll do that, brethren. Sometimes things that we think are so important. If I go back in my life, there's so many things I'd do a different way. I have made so many mistakes, both in my work as a preacher and in my work as a person. And I thought I was doing the right thing. It's almost like cutting your own foot off, right? I've done that because I wouldn't let something go. Jesus stresses our need to pass on, to move on, and sometimes the only way to move on is to give forgiveness. Forgiveness is truly letting something go 100%. Anything short of forgiveness is not totally letting it go. And Jesus and God presses that, pushes that, right? Matthew chapter 18, verses 22 through 25, Jesus said to him, I don't say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain man who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he began to settle the accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, what did the master do? Let's just wipe the palate clean, right? His master commanded, so he removed that that $10,000 talent debt. But as he was not able to pay his master, he commanded that it be sold and his wife and children and all that he had, and payment be made. And that's when he starts begging, please, 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 don't do this to me. Don't do this to me. He says, okay, we won't do that to you, right? I won't do that to you. And guess what he does? He turns right around, and there's people under him that owe him money, and he throws them in prison. So he wanted the forgiveness of God, right? He wanted forgiveness for the debt, but is he going to show any mercy or kindness towards somebody else? Absolutely not. And if we do that, guess what? You're not going to make it to heaven with that spirit. You're not going to make it to heaven with that attitude. There's so many people that cannot. They want the mercy of God, but they don't extend it towards others. In Matthew chapter 6, he says, And forgive us our debts. Remember learning to pray? The model prayer. Forgive us our debts. And you know how often I'm praying, God, please forgive me? But Jesus says, no, Terrell, you just don't ask for your sins forgiven. But I want you to say it this way. Forgive me, Lord, of my debts, as I forgive the people who sin against me. I mean, really dwell on that. How do you want others to forgive you? Do you want it to be say, oh, yeah, I forgive you, and then stab you in the back? You want them to, I'll forgive you, and I'll forget it, and they go around gossiping about what you did. Christians do that, folks. And definitely people of the world do it. That's not being humble. Humility is you empty self. And when you're forgiven, you're grateful for it, and you ask God to forgive others. And he says, and do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For if you forgive men their trespasses, verse 14, what does he say? Your heavenly Father will also forgive you. Did you get that? We can say we forgive people, but guess who knows if you really did it or not? I may not know it, but God knows it. And guess what God also knows? God knows that you're going to come to him and ask him to forgive you. And guess what he says? Terrell, if you haven't done that against that person, don't you come crawling to me and ask me to forgive you, because you didn't forgive them. That's pretty strong language, isn't it? I need to be humble. Humility, you empty yourself in your pride and your arrogance and your hurt and your anger, and you forgive people. I'll go on to the next one. Point number 3. Hold your tongue. Oh, that tongue, it talks. Ooh, we've always got it open, right? Shut your mouth. Close it, because the tongue can't. Guess what? When you shut your mouth, try talking. Try to gossip with your mouth shut. Try to slander with your mouth shut. And even good things. Try to compliment somebody with your mouth shut. It ain't going to work. We got to open our mouths, right? This is for all you cat lovers, you know. I thought halfway through I need something to wake you up. Anyway, hold your tongue. Why is the tongue such a problem? Because we human beings feel an urgency to express our thoughts and ideas. Now, some of us, I'd be the first on the list, some of us feel a greater urge to do that than others. You know, whether I'm teaching the class or I'm sitting in the class, just ask Joe on Wednesday night. You can always count on Terrell saying something. And you go sit in the class and can amen it. I don't mind if you amen it. I do. I'm this type of person. I have the urgency to speak. I have the urgency to talk, and share my ideas. And it's weird, because it's not necessarily because I think I'm the smartest person in the world. I promise you that. But there's just this urge in me to talk and to share ideas. I've shared a lot of ideas that were just completely dumb, And somebody brought that to my attention. Why did you say that, Terrell? That didn't have anything to do with the topic. Oh, it didn't? Oh, wow, I got something to learn. But we do. We all want to be noticed. We all want to share what's inside. That's part of being a social being, right? So in that sense, it's okay. I'm not saying that you can never open your mouth. You can never share your idea. But humility comes when we practice shutting it now and then. Because that means I can control it, right? If I can't stop, that means I can't control it. My tongue is doing the leading here, right? Why is speaking less so difficult? I think it's because deep down we're fighting impulses and tendencies and that should be to immediately say whatever I feel, whatever I think. Now, you don't have to raise your hand, but I am so guilty of this, and I have put myself in so many dumb, awkward positions because I did this. There was such an urgency to say something that I said something stupid. I said something that didn't apply. I embarrassed myself, right? Because that tendency to say it, because I felt it, and I thought it, and then you think, ooh, why did I say that? Because we're fighting that. So how does humility help me with this? Well, let's go to the Bible. God always has the answer. In James chapter 2, verses 19 through 20, he says, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be what? What's God's advice to Terrell Bunting? He says, Terrell, I want you to be swift to listen. I want you to hear, swift to hear, slow to wrath. Because sometimes a lot of what I hear is going to make me angry. And a lot of what you hear might make you angry. And God says, all right, you're going to be slow to speak because I know the anger is going to be there, right? So not only am I going to be slow to speak, but I'm going to be slow to wrath, right? And he says, because the wrath of man does not produce righteousness. Anybody that gets upset, everybody's angry, guess what? If you don't dissipate it, get rid of it, you are not going to produce righteousness. You're going to produce the opposite. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19, it says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. You want to find somebody that's a big sinner, find a big talker. Ooh, is that me? You know, I do a lot of talking, right? So you could be little in stature and still be a big talker. God says, Terrell, you know, multitude of words, there's a better chance there's going to be sin there. Sin is not lacking. But who does he say is the wise person? Who is the humble person? It's the one who restrains his lips. You know, sometimes it's unfair because sometimes the quiet people really get a bad rap. Quiet people often are interpreted as, oh, well, they're stuck up. Oh, they're self-righteous. They think they're better than everybody else. They're arrogant. Just because you don't say much. Is that fair? Is that a fair assumption about somebody? Absolutely, it's not. In fact, God commends people that sit quietly and observe and speak once in a while. There's value in that. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13. He who answers a matter before he hears it. That was me. He says it's to folly and to shame for that person. Somebody walks through the door. I'll give you a concrete example. Somebody walks through the door and says, oh, glad you're here today. So where do you normally go to church? And they fill in the blank. And it's, in my book, it's not the right answer. My whole demeanor will change. The old me. It's not the new me. My whole demeanor changes. It's like, okay, my cogs are working. Okay, they believe that wrong, that wrong, that wrong. And I start shooting at them. Bam, bam, bam. Well, you all do this and you all do that and that's wrong. And people that do that aren't going to go to heaven because the Bible says, if you love me, you keep his commandments. And that person turns around, walks out, and never comes back in this building. Now, that was real Christ-like, wasn't it? Do you ever see any example where Christ is doing that? In fact, the woman caught in adultery, what did he say to her? He just said, well, where's your accusers? They've all gone. Okay. My advice to you is live your life without sin. Go and sin no more. Wait and find out more information, folks. Don't answer something before you know. Don't say something before you hear, and find out the story behind the person. Proverbs chapter 17, verses 27 through 28. He who has knowledge spares his words. Okay, there's a smart person. They don't talk very much. And a man of understanding has a calm spirit. This is something I struggle with because I'm very, I don't know what your word say, emotional maybe. I get real loud and find myself, I'm yelling at you and I don't mean to, so I got to back off, you know. It's just because I get engaged. But he says, Terrell, no, a man of understanding is going to have a calm spirit. Even the fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he's considered perceptive. He who guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from trouble. Let's look at another one. Number 4. Notice the green grass. And those who know me, I love green grass. My favorite pastimes is mowing green grass. My neighbors tease me and say, don't you have anything else to do, Terrell, besides mow your yard? I have a lot more to do. But I do enjoy mowing. Mowing calms me. And the more stressed I am, the more I mow. Thank goodness for 0 turns. Right? Notice the green grass. How much green grass is in your yard? How much green grass is in my yard? You know, we have that saying, we're so busy noticing the green grass in somebody else's yard that we can't see that we got green grass. That's going to be this point here, right? We get restless. We get discontented, even in the best situations. We live in a world where we have everything right here. click of the hand. I was talking to Heath earlier, you know, about this point. And, I mean, you don't have to go to the grocery store anymore. You don't have to go to the clothes store anymore, the shoe store anymore. All you do is pick up that phone, and they drop it off at your door. Talk about ease and just, whoa, boy. But boy, I didn't get to go on the Alaskan cruise like my neighbors did. Poor me. Poor me. Right? We feel sorry for ourselves because we don't get something that somebody else has. And because we don't have what we want or we can't have what everybody else has, we get restless and discontented. Even when I've got it pretty good, you know? The world encourages us to always want more. Right? Your phone. You order that one thing, guess what? If you order a pair of shoes from Johnson & Murphy's, okay? You probably won't because there are pricey shoes. However, I got a son-in-law that works there, so I get a discount. You know, but you order, whatever you order a bag of oatmeal, and guess what's going to be on your phone for the next 2 years? Oatmeal galore, right? Shoes galore. Why? Because the sale guy says, you don't want just one bag of oatmeal. You need 4,065 bags of oatmeal to be really up there. And they inundate you with whatever it is, right? More. That's the world we're living in. Should it surprise us that our kids are sucked into it? I didn't have that growing up, but I still wanted stuff that other people didn't have. Humility teaches us to notice our own green grass, right? The spirit of contentment can thrive in any circumstance. That's biblical teaching. We'll look at that in just a minute. But I want you to see that. The spirit of contentment can thrive no matter what the external things are. So whether I have those new shoes from Johnson & Murphy or not, whether I have that new dress or that new BMW, which I've never had, right? That we think, oh, wow, we wish for, right? Humility tells us, well, yeah, it's a pretty car, but you know, I've got a car. In fact, you come to my house, you see I've got more than one car. I got an old beat-up truck for my kayaks because I love to go kayaking and take people with me, right? So I need a kayak. A truck. How else are you going to carry 8 kayaks? My wife says, you need another kayak. Well, it's not for me. It's for whoever I'm going to invite, right? And then we got the car that we bought when we moved here that is still going, and it's gone close to 400,000 miles. I bought a used car, the white car that Karen drives, 3 years ago to replace the car that I thought was going to drop dead because this was a good buy. And it's still going. So there's an old beat-up Vibe in the yard. And then there's a white used Focus, and then I've got my gray Focus. 2 people. Ooh, that sounds a little much, isn't it? Isn't it interesting how we justify what we got? I've got a lot of stuff, right? Humility tells me, Terry, you can be content with the pickup truck. It's not the next ride for Karen and I to church, but I can do so many things with that, right? I can load it up. I can help people move. I can, So, the idea, can I find contentment in what I've got? Why is noticing our own green grass such a hard thing to do? Well, it's hard to keep gratitude fresh, right? When we first get something, we're so grateful for it. You just moved into a new house. It's a beautiful place. And we're so grateful. We think, boy, God has blessed us. What have I done to deserve this lovely home? Well, I've been in my home. I've been here 16 years now. That's a house. No, it's a nice house. Where's my gratefulness? There's some people that don't have a roof over their head. So it's the idea. It's hard to keep that gratitude alive. And we get bored with the same thing over and over again. Just how many times do people replace their phones? I'm not going any further than that. Well, I want that newest one because it's got this newfangled dingle thing here that I want on it. And it does this, and it'll do this, and it'll do this, and it'll do that. Wow, I got to have it, Dad. No, you don't have that. Be grateful you've got a phone. And we've heard that. The old people always tell us, and they did to me when I was old. Be grateful at least you've got a bathroom in the house, not that you share it with 5 people. We lived in Norway for 20 years in a house with 1 bathroom and 1 man and 4 women. Yeah. Be grateful I have an indoor bathroom. You know, that's what I think. That's how you think about it. Not that I want a house that's got at least 2 bathrooms. What more? I mean, is that too much to ask for? We get bored and we seek novelty and we want something different. And yet, what does the Bible tell us? Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned. That should be written in red. Paul says, you've got to learn this, folks. It doesn't come natural to be content. It doesn't. God knows humanity. You don't need to think any further than Adam and Eve in the garden. Who would want anything else? I mean, perfect place. And God says, one thing I just don't want you to do. And they had to do it. Not content. That's why they did it. Eve wasn't content. Adam wasn't content. And guess what? They lost it all. Interesting story, isn't it? He says, but I have learned in whatever state I am in to be what? To be content. I know how to be abased. That means that I could live with nothing, abased, down low, made low, which is the concept of humility. And I know how to abound, the opposite, right? Wherever and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. How in the world can we ever become that way? The only way that you will become this way is to realize that you can do this through Christ, who strengthens you. Christ gives us the ability to be content. You know how many married couples are never content? You know how many people at work are never content? Because they're always wanting something that they have no right to demand. So how can my life become content? How can my marriage become content? That can happen through Christ. And if you can't remember that passage, read it on the wall on the way out. Every time we leave this building, we should be reminded of that. That you know what? I've got quite a lot of green grass in my yard. And I'm going to be content with what I have. And the reason I can be content with what I have is because I'm not going to have any anxiety. I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to worry about it. He says, but be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your request be made known to God. And what will happen when I do that? He says, the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus. Calmness comes. Serenity comes. Satisfaction comes. It says, if you've got food and clothing, with those things be content. But those who desire to be rich, he warns us. He says, if you're dry because you want more, it's never enough. He says, all you're doing is exposing yourself to more temptation, more things that can be foolish and harmful to you, and it can destroy you. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with the things that you have. Why? Why should I be content with what I've got? I could have more. They've got more, Lord. He said, because of who I am. If you have God in your life, that's the richest blessing you could ever have. And God reminds us of that here. He says, I will never leave you. My spouse, no, she won't. At least I don't think she will. Our spouses might leave us. Our best friend can turn their back on us. My boss can get mad and fire me, which would be you. You guys can get mad at me and fire me, right? But I don't have to worry because God has promised me. Because I've chosen to be his son. He says to me, I will never leave you, Terrell. And I will never forsake you. And you know the beauty of that? He says that to every one of you as well. That is wonderful. And the last thing, got 2 minutes to do it. Wait on the Lord. People that are humble people can wait. We live in this instantaneous world, right? You can get it on your doorstep, no matter what you want. It's going to be there, delivered. Sometimes it's the same day, right? Or the next day. But waiting and not getting something instantaneous is actually a biblical concept. God wants us to wait. Well, why is waiting so hard? It just is. Because that's our world. And part of it, I think, sometimes we're guilty of creating this ourselves. Every generation wants to do better than the last generation. I remember hearing my grandparents telling me that all they wanted to do is to make enough money to give their children more than they had. And guess what the next generation says? Well, I want to make enough money so my kids don't have to go through what I had to go through. And guess what the next generation says? We repeat it, and we repeat it, and we repeat it. And guess what we're doing? There's a danger of making our children fall in love with things. Because who you are is the most important things which you can give your children. Not what money you leave them, what house you give them, what property you give them. So this gathering more so they don't have to do without like I did. The only where I'd say that applies if you live the life without God and you want to give your kids God. Then I'd be all on board with that thought process. But if you're talking about things of this world where moth and rust and everything decays and rots and stolen, you're not giving your kids what they need. They need God. They need Jesus. Let your conduct be without covetousness, he says. Be content with your things. James chapter 5, therefore be patient, brethren, until the Lord is coming. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. It's cutting real short. The farmer, I guess it's about March. I could ask Cindy here. Is it about March, Cindy? Or is it? They get those fields ready. They're out there. Even the no-till people are getting it ready. They may not be turning the soil, but they're dumping the lime and whatever's needed. They're prepping, aren't they? And then it comes down, those seeds go in the ground. And does the farmer say, oh, great, tomorrow I'm going to get a bunch of money? They got to wait months. And while they're waiting, they're at the mercy of the what? They're at the mercy of the weather. Hoping the rains will come when it's supposed to come. Hoping they'll leave when they're supposed to leave, you know. Hope the bugs don't eat too much of it, you know. Hope that some disease doesn't hit it. I mean, God says, look at the farmer. Learn from the farmer. The farmer has to wait. And sometimes they wait years before they ever own that land. They wait years before that tractor's ever paid for. Right? But they keep on and they wait with hope they're going to achieve the goal. And he says that's what we need to do as God's people. We need to be people be patient. You know, I expect you to be perfect tomorrow. I'm sorry, but I do. You need to straighten up your life and get it all squared away to please me because that's what I deserve. That's how humans think. We don't have any patience. We don't have any kindness and giving them space and being patient. You know, if we allowed God to treat us like we treat other people, I don't think any of us would have any chance of salvation. We don't have patience with each other. We have no kindness with each other. We get ticked and peeved, you know, because it hasn't happened when we wanted it on our terms, is what it is, right? And yet Ephesians says, my people, let me tell you how they are. They're patient people. They're humble people with all lowliness and meanness, right? Or strictness or demands. No, with all lowliness and gentleness and with long suffering, bearing with one another in love. You know, I want it done now. Let the Lord work. If there's things in your life that you have tried to fix and you just can't fix them, okay? What does he tell us to do? Cast upon me your worries, right? And let the Lord work. The Lord is a wonderful master. He is all powerful. He can perform miracles, folks. I can't, you can't, but the Lord can. And you may say, well, that person's never going to change unless a miracle's performed. So I say, okay, fine. You quit trying to change them then and turn them over to God, right? And my role then is once I've turned them over to God, I'm going to wait. I'm not turning my back on them, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait patiently for the Lord. And he talks about here, he says we're going to bear with one another in love until what? Till we all come to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son, to the perfect man. We expect perfection out of each other. We expect our brethren to be perfect. We expect our spouses to be perfect. We expect our children to be perfect. We expect our bosses to be perfect. That's what we expect. And sometimes we demand it. Where do you get that in the Bible? God says, no. My people don't make demands. My people are lowly, and they're gentle, and they're long-suffering, and they love. And I love this expression because it indicates that this is a person that's hard to love. Bearing with one another. See, we just want to love when it's easy. Bear with one another with love. And he says, and when you do that, you will grow. And one day, I don't know when it'll be, but one day, you'll be the perfect man, the full stature of Jesus Christ. Practicing humility. Ways to think of yourself less and think less of yourself. That's what humility is all about. So these are, and the lesson's going to be yours, these are the 10 things, and there's a lot more of them in the Bible. If you say, well, Terrell, I don't know if I'm really a humble person or not. Well, just test yourself. How do you do with these things? Are you good at those? Guess what? I can come up with 20 more. So go ahead and work on these 10. And then maybe next year we'll pick up another 10. And maybe the next year we'll pick up another 10. And guess what? By the time we get to there, we got to start back with these. Because that's how I am. I do pretty good on a topic for a while, and then I mess up. Thank you so much for being kind and considerate and patient with me today. You all have been humble. You have allowed me to speak to you. Thank you so much.